It was supposed to be a calm Saturday morning, the kind of morning where the sun feels softer, the breeze carries the scent of pine trees, and the birds are loud enough to make you forget everything else. Emily was outside tending to her flower bed, a straw hat tilted over her golden hair, humming softly as she watered the marigolds she had planted last month. From the garage, I could see her framed perfectly against the backdrop of our quiet little property, 10 acres of pure freedom, far away from the chaos we had left behind in the city. I was tightening the bolts on the garage door when I heard it, the distinct hum of tires crunching over gravel, followed by the sharp screech of brakes that didn't belong to anyone we knew. My hands froze on the wrench as I turned, spotting a black SUV pulling up, dust rising in its wake. It wasn't just any SUV. It was big, tinted, and bore a cheap, security enforcement decal on the side that looked like it had been printed at a strip mall sign shop. Two men stepped out, their movements sharp and aggressive, like they owned the place. They wore matching black tactical uniforms that might have fooled someone at first glance, but to a trained eye, they were nothing but imposters. The badges clipped to their belts were plastic, the kind kids use for Halloween costumes, and their demeanor screamed of men who thrived on intimidation but lacked real authority. The taller one, about 6 feet, with a buzzcut and mirrored sunglasses, marched straight toward Emily like she was some trespasser on her own land. "Ma'am," he barked, his voice loud and commanding, "you've violated multiple HOA regulations. We're here to conduct an immediate inspection." Emily blinked, momentarily confused, before offering a polite but firm smile. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering the hose, "but this property isn't part of an HOA. We bought the land outright. There must be some mistake." The second man, shorter but built like a linebacker, stepped closer with a cocky grin that sent a chill down my spine. "Listen, lady," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "We don't make mistakes. You're getting citations for violations unless you comply. Gates, landscaping, you name it. Now, step aside." From where I stood, the tension was palpable. I set my wrench down slowly, walking toward them, my steps steady and deliberate. Years of training had ingrained a calmness in me that didn't waver even when danger was seconds away. "Is there a problem here?" I asked evenly, keeping my voice calm but carrying an edge that made both men glance my way. The tall one turned, sizing me up with a smirk that told me he'd already underestimated me. "Stay out of this," he snapped, flashing that cheap badge like it meant something. "This doesn't concern you. She needs to comply, or things will get ugly fast." Emily, ever composed, tried again. "We're not under your jurisdiction. You need to leave our property now." The linebacker chuckled darkly, stepping closer until he was just inches from her. "Lady," he sneered, "don't make this harder than it has to be." I felt my chest tighten, that familiar coldness settling in, the one I used to feel before a mission, that razor-sharp edge between peace and chaos. My jaw tightened as I took another step forward. "You heard my wife," I said, my voice dropping, deliberate and sharp. "Leave, now." It all happened in the next heartbeat. The linebacker's grin twisted into something ugly, and without warning, his hand lashed out. The sound of the slap cracked through the air like a gunshot, echoing off the trees. Emily's straw hat flew off as her head snapped to the side, her hand instinctively going to her cheek. For a second, the world seemed to freeze. I saw her wide, stunned eyes, the faint red mark already blooming across her skin, and that was it. Every ounce of restraint I had, every wall I had built to keep my past locked away, shattered in an instant. My vision tunneled, my pulse slowed, and the training drilled into me over years of serving as a Navy SEAL came roaring back to life. I wasn't the quiet, easygoing husband anymore. "Big mistake," I whispered, my voice low enough that only he heard it. I moved before he could blink, every motion fluid and precise, honed through countless hours of close-quarters combat drills. My hand shot forward, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. The satisfying pop of his joint giving way was followed by his scream as he dropped to his knees. The tall one reached for something on his belt, what looked like a taser, but he hesitated, and that single moment of hesitation sealed his fate. 2 strides closed the distance. My hand clamped around his wrist, twisting and disarming him in a blur before slamming him down onto the gravel driveway. His face hit the ground with a sickening crunch, blood immediately pooling beneath his nose. The neighbors across the street were starting to gather, drawn out by the shouting and now frozen in wide-eyed shock as they watched the scene unfold. Emily, still clutching her cheek, had her phone out now, snapping pictures of their faces, the SUV, the fake uniforms. The linebacker writhed on the ground, clutching his arm, his bravado evaporated, replaced by the desperate whimpering of a man realizing he had picked a fight he couldn't win. The tall one, pinned under my knee, tried to stammer something, but I pressed down harder, making him choke on his words. "Who sent you?" I growled, my voice ice cold, the kind of tone that never needed to be raised to demand obedience. "And nobody," the tall one gasped, his face grinding into the dirt. Well, we're just security, hired to patrol. They said this property was in violation. Emily's voice was steady now, sharp and clear like the edge of a blade. Security. You broke into our property, threatened me, and laid your hands on me. That's assault. I looked down at the man pinned beneath me, my hand tightening just enough to make him feel the promise of pain. You have 10 seconds to tell me who sent you, or I swear. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the air, blue and red lights flickering through the trees as the county sheriff's cruiser came into view. I didn't move, keeping both men on the ground until the sheriff and his deputies stepped out, weapons drawn until they took in the scene, the fake uniforms, the blood, Emily's bruised cheek, and the unmistakable Navy SEAL insignia tattooed across my forearm. Stand down, the sheriff ordered his deputies, lowering his weapon as recognition flickered in his eyes. I know this man, he said quietly. Then, to me, you handled this by the book, son. We'll take it from here. I stepped back slowly, letting the deputies cuff the two imposters. One of them, his face smeared with blood, tried to protest weakly, but the sheriff wasn't having it. Save it, the sheriff barked. Impersonating law enforcement, assault, trespassing, you're going away for a long time. Emily slipped her hand into mine, her fingers trembling slightly, and I wrapped my arm around her, grounding her, keeping her close. I could feel the collective stares of the neighbors, phones still out, recording every moment, the whispers already starting. The sheriff, watching the scene, gave me a nod of respect before turning to the crowd. Show's over, folks. These men are going to jail. As the cruisers pulled away, leaving nothing but silence and the faint scent of burnt rubber, Emily leaned against me, her voice soft. I can't believe this happened. On our land. I looked down at her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, my voice steady but cold. They made one mistake, I said, my eyes following the disappearing lights. They thought they could walk onto my land, hurt my wife, and walk away. They won't be making that mistake again. Inside, I was already thinking ahead, about who had sent them, about why they thought this place, our sanctuary, was theirs to control. And I knew one thing for certain, whoever was pulling the strings had no idea what storm they'd just unleashed. The flashing red and blue lights faded down the long gravel driveway, leaving behind a heavy silence that seemed almost deafening. Emily was still leaning against me, her breathing uneven but steadying, while I stood at the edge of our porch watching the dust settle. The neighbors, who'd been pretending to casually record every second, slowly began drifting back to their houses, whispering furiously to each other. I knew that whispering wouldn't stop anytime soon. In less than an hour, this story would spread like wildfire through the entire neighborhood. The quiet guy down the road took down 2 HOA cops, like it was nothing. But what none of them knew, not yet, was that this wasn't random. This was planned. Someone sent those 2 to intimidate us. And that someone had just painted a target on their back. Inside, Emily sat at the kitchen table with an ice pack pressed gently against her cheek. She tried to smile when I came in, but I could see the tremor in her lips, the way her fingers curled tighter around the ice pack. You okay? I asked softly, my voice low as I crouched beside her chair. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her. I don't understand, Mark. Who does that? Who pretends to be cops and just storms onto someone's property? They said something about HOA violations, but we're not part of an HOA. This land doesn't even have covenants. I took her free hand and squeezed it gently. I know, that's what we're going to find out. But first, I glanced at the security monitor mounted in the corner of the kitchen, a live feed from the cameras I'd installed around the property when we moved in. We're pulling the footage. We're going to have every second of this on file. Emily exhaled shakily but nodded, watching as I walked into my office. The adrenaline from the fight earlier was wearing off, replaced by a simmering anger that coiled in my chest. I'd been through war zones, stared down enemies who wanted nothing more than to see me dead, but this, someone putting their hands on my wife, on my land, was a different kind of war. I pulled up the footage, and sure enough, the cameras had caught it all. The black SUV rolling up, the fake badges, the slap, and every precise move I'd made afterward. It was clean, undeniable evidence. I downloaded the footage, encrypted it, and sent a copy straight to the sheriff's office. When I returned to the kitchen, Emily had set her ice pack down, her hand steady now. What happens next? She asked quietly. I sat down across from her, my elbows resting on the table. Next, we find out who sent them. And when we do, they're going to wish they'd never stepped foot on this land. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the wooden cabin had me on edge, every rustle of the trees outside making me wonder if someone else would come nosing around. Old instincts, the kind I thought I'd left behind overseas, flared to life. By sunrise, I had a plan. First, I made some calls, quiet ones, to people I trusted from my years in the service. Old contacts who didn't ask questions but knew how to get information fast. Within hours, I had what I needed. The SUV was rented under a fake name, but the credit card used to secure it traced back to a company, the same company that handled security for the HOA office 2 miles down the road. Emily stood behind me as I explained what I'd found. "So, the HOA really did send them?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "Looks like it," I said, my jaw tightening. "They wanted to scare us. Make us feel like we didn't belong here. But they didn't count on one thing." Her brow furrowed slightly. "What's that?" "That they picked the wrong damn house." Later that day, the sheriff called. His voice was grim but steady. "Mark, those 2 men are in county lockup now, but this thing goes deeper. They're claiming they were subcontracted by an HOA board member named Martin Hayes. He says you were in violation for installing that security gate." I let out a humorless laugh. "A security gate? On my land? A gate I paid for, on a driveway I built?" "Yeah," the sheriff said, his tone carrying the same disbelief. "Listen, off the record, Hayes is a piece of work. Runs that HOA like it's his personal fiefdom. But even for him, this is crossing the line." "Thanks, Sheriff," I said evenly. "I'll handle it from here." Emily shot me a look when I hung up, a mix of worry and something sharper, something protective. "Mark," she said slowly, "what are you thinking?" I stood, sliding my phone into my pocket. "I'm thinking it's time I had a talk with this Martin Hayes." The HOA office was a squat little building at the edge of the neighborhood, glass front, manicured lawn, and an oversized sign that screamed authority to anyone desperate enough to buy into their illusion of control. I parked the truck right in front, stepped out, and walked through the front door like I owned the place. Inside, a receptionist tried to stop me, stammering something about appointments, but one look at me, the calm, measured look I'd perfected over years in combat zones, had her freezing in place. "Where's Hayes?" I asked quietly. She pointed toward a corner office, and I knocked once before stepping inside. Hayes was exactly what I expected, mid-50s, smug, sitting behind a polished desk like a king on his throne. He looked up, and his smirk faltered just slightly when he saw me. "You can't just walk in here," he started, but I cut him off. "You sent men to my property," I said, my voice calm but carrying a weight that made the air in the room shift. "Men who impersonated law enforcement. Men who laid their hands on my wife." Hayes swallowed hard but tried to recover his composure. "We had reason to believe your property was in violation of HOA guidelines." "The gate. You don't have jurisdiction over my land," I snapped, my voice sharp as a knife. "And if you think for 1 second you're going to bully my family like you bully everyone else in this neighborhood, you're dead wrong." He blustered, tried to puff up his chest. "We have rules. You have nothing," I said, stepping closer. "And if you or anyone connected to you sets foot on my property again, I won't be calling the sheriff next time." Hayes paled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a dangerous whisper. "You've got one chance to back off. Take it." When I walked out of that office, the entire staff was silent, their eyes wide, whispers already starting as I left. Back at home, Emily was waiting on the porch, her expression softening when she saw me. "Handled?" she asked simply. "For now," I said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as I led her inside. "But if they try anything again," I didn't need to finish the sentence. Over the next week, the neighborhood was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The HOA trucks that usually patrolled the area disappeared. Neighbors who had once looked at us with suspicion now nodded in quiet respect when we passed by. But I wasn't naive. I knew men like Hayes didn't just back down completely. They retreated, regrouped, waited for another opportunity. That's why I reinforced the property even more, updated the security system, adjusted the perimeter cameras, and made sure every approach to the house was covered. Emily teased me about turning our home into a fortress, but I saw the appreciation in her eyes every time the cameras pinged her phone with a clear, safe feed. One evening, as we sat on the back deck watching the sunset over the trees, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think it's over?" she asked softly. I looked out at the quiet, the golden light painting everything in soft hues, and shook my head slightly. "Not yet," I admitted. "But when it is, they'll never bother us, or anyone else, again. Because if there's one thing I learned in the SEALs, it's this: you don't let bullies dictate the rules. And you never, ever let them think they've won." Our office was eerily calm. Too calm. The usual patrol cars that cruised the neighborhood vanished like ghosts. No fake warning letters. No passive-aggressive notes taped to the mailbox. Even Martin Hayes, who strutted around like he owned a subdivision, had seemingly disappeared into his oversized brick mansion. On the surface, it looked like a win. But I'd been in this game long enough to recognize a tactical retreat when I saw one. Men like Hayes didn't surrender, they regrouped. And when they came back, they usually came harder. I wasn't about to wait around and find out. By the third day, I'd upgraded every inch of the property. Infrared cameras lined the perimeter, motion detectors set to alert both my phone and the sheriff's office. I dug out some of my old tactical equipment, just in case. Emily didn't say anything when she saw me setting it up, but I noticed the way her eyes followed me, the way her fingers lingered against my arm like she needed to reassure herself. "Mark," she said one evening, her voice soft but steady as we sat on the porch, "are we safe?" I turned my gaze to her, taking in the faint bruise that still traced her cheekbone from where that imposter had hit her. My jaw clenched. "We will be," I promised. But promises don't always stop trouble from coming. It was a Thursday morning when the storm broke. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old dirt bike, when my phone buzzed, a motion alert from the front gate camera. I wiped my hands, pulled up the feed, and froze. 4 SUVs, black and unmarked, were idling just beyond the gate. 4 men stepped out, each dressed in tactical gear that looked official but screamed counterfeit to a trained eye. Emily stepped into the garage, her coffee cup in hand, and stopped when she saw my face. "Mark, what is it?" "They're back," I said, my voice low and even. Within seconds, she was inside the house, locking doors and pulling the blinds while I grabbed the handset for the intercom mounted by the gate. "This is private property," I said, my voice amplified through the speakers. "State your business." One of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing sunglasses like it was a uniform requirement, stepped forward. His smirk was audible even through the static. "You don't belong here," he drawled. "HOA orders. Open the gate, and maybe we can handle this the easy way." I almost laughed. "You've got 30 seconds to get off my land before the sheriff's here. You think you can scare us with the law?" The man taunted. "Buddy, we are the law here." I didn't bother replying. Instead, I tapped the screen to pull up a different feed, the one linked directly to the sheriff's secure line. The footage was already transmitting. I could see them growing restless, pacing near the gate, probably realizing I wasn't bluffing. That was when one of them, a shorter guy with a shaved head, made the mistake of climbing the gate. I stepped outside before he could even swing a leg over. "You've got guts," I said evenly, my boots crunching against the gravel as I closed the distance. "But guts don't make you bulletproof." The man hesitated, mid-climb, his eyes narrowing. "What are you gonna do?" "Hit me. You got away with it once." I didn't let him finish. One sharp move, a pivot, a grab, and his weight was yanked forward until he hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of him. The others surged forward then, shouting, but I raised a hand and barked, "Stop." It wasn't loud, but it was the kind of command that cuts through chaos. The kind honed in years of combat zones, where one wrong move meant someone didn't come home. They froze. "You've got no authority here," I said, my voice low and sharp. "You're trespassing, assaulting a federal judge's property." That last line landed like a bomb. One of the men actually stumbled, glancing nervously at the others. Clearly, they hadn't been told. Right on cue, the wail of sirens grew louder, and 2 sheriff cruisers roared up the drive, gravel spitting under their tires. Sheriff Davis stepped out first, hand on his holster but face calm as he surveyed the scene. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone deceptively casual, "what seems to be the problem?" The leader, the one with the sunglasses, started blustering about HOA regulations and community bylaws, but Davis cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it," the sheriff said flatly. "I've already got the footage. You boys are done." One by one, they were cuffed, their fake badges confiscated, their vehicles impounded. As the last SUV was towed away, Davis turned to me, his expression grim. "This isn't just HOA nonsense anymore," he said. "These guys have priors, impersonation, fraud, even assault. I've got county attorneys crawling all over this now." Emily stepped out then, her hand slipping into mine. "So it's over?" she asked softly. Davis shook his head. "Not quite." The man pulling their strings, Hayes, lawyered up. "But between your footage, your testimony, and what we've got on these idiots, he's going down hard." I nodded, but inside, I was already 2 steps ahead. Men like Hayes didn't go down quietly. The next week was a blur of meetings with investigators, attorneys, and reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. Apparently, HOA mob boss sends fake cops to harass family, made for good headlines. Emily hated the attention, but she stood tall through it all, her quiet strength grounding me in ways she probably didn't even realize. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the tree line, she reached over and threaded her fingers through mine. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't marry you for the quiet life." I chuckled, the tension in my chest easing just a fraction. "Good, because quiet doesn't seem to stick around us for long." When the court date finally arrived, the entire neighborhood turned out. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Hayes strutted in, his designer suit and fake confidence doing little to hide the panic in his eyes. I sat beside Emily, calm and composed, as the prosecution laid out everything, the impersonation, the trespassing, the assault. The footage from my cameras played on a large screen, every second crystal clear, every face identifiable. When it was over, the judge, a no-nonsense woman with steel in her eyes, leaned forward and said simply, "Mr. Hayes, you've abused your position, endangered lives, and violated multiple state and federal laws. I have no choice but to sentence you to the maximum penalties allowed." The gavel cracked like a gunshot, and just like that, it was over. Hayes was led out in cuffs, his empire of fear collapsing in real time. Outside, neighbors who had once watched us with suspicion now approached with gratitude, their voices hushed but sincere. One elderly couple even brought over a homemade pie that evening, their way of saying thanks without words. Emily and I sat on the porch that night, the stars bright above us, the air thick with the quiet that had been missing for weeks. "Think it's finally over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked out at the property, at the gates, the cameras, the house we'd built with our own hands, and nodded slowly. "For now," I said. "But if anyone ever tries something like that again..." She smiled faintly, her head resting on my shoulder. "I know, they picked the wrong house." And she was right, because the thing about men like me, men forged in fire, tempered by chaos, is that we don't just fight to win. We fight to protect. And no one, not an HOA, not a coward hiding behind fake badges, not anyone, messes with my family and walks away unscathed.